You don't talk much. For some people, it's a casual observation. For others, it's a label they've carried for years. And the strange thing is, most of the time, it's completely wrong. Because many people who seem quiet aren't actually quiet at all. You've probably seen it happen. Someone barely says a word in one room, then suddenly around different people they become energetic, funny, expressive, and impossible to ignore. So what changed? Not their personality, the environment. Psychology has discovered something most people overlook. Silence is often a response, not a trait. In other words, people don't always speak according to who they are. They speak according to how safe they feel, how understood they feel, and how much they trust the people around them. That's why the loudest person in one group can become silent in another, and why the quietest person in the office might become the most talkative person at home. Yet society often misunderstands silence. When someone doesn't speak much, people rush to conclusions. They're shy, they're awkward, they're unfriendly, they're arrogant. But these assumptions reveal more about the observer than the quiet person. Because silence is not empty. Silence can mean caution. Silence can mean observation. Silence can mean intelligence. Sometimes silence simply means a person has learned that not every environment deserves access to their energy. And that's where things become interesting. Because the psychology of quiet people has very little to do with having nothing to say. In fact, many of them spend more time thinking, analyzing, and understanding than the people speaking the most. The real question isn't, why don't they talk? The real question is, what makes them decide that speaking is worth it? And the answer reveals something fascinating about human behavior. The first reason quiet people don't talk much has nothing to do with confidence. It has to do with trust. Most people think communication starts with words, but psychology shows that communication starts long before anyone speaks. It starts with a simple question: do I feel safe here? When people sense judgment, criticism, or rejection, they naturally become more guarded. Not because they're hiding, because they're protecting. And this is especially true for people who think deeply. They don't want to explain themselves to people who have already decided not to understand them. But the moment trust appears, everything changes. The walls begin to come down, the hesitation disappears, and the same person who seemed distant suddenly becomes open, expressive, and authentic. The second reason is something psychologists call social filtering. Most people speak first and evaluate later. Quiet people often do the opposite. They evaluate first, then decide whether speaking is worth it. When they enter a room, they're paying attention. They're watching how people treat each other, how they respond to different opinions, how they react when someone makes a mistake. They're gathering information, not because they're judging, because they're deciding whether the environment deserves their energy. And if the answer is no, they stay quiet, not out of fear, out of selectiveness. The third reason comes from experience. Many quiet people weren't always quiet. At some point, they tried to contribute. They shared ideas. They expressed feelings. They spoke honestly. And what happened? They were interrupted, ignored, misunderstood, or dismissed. Over time, the brain learns patterns. It starts asking, why invest energy where it isn't valued? Eventually, silence becomes less painful than constantly feeling unheard. This isn't weakness. It's adaptation. A person who has repeatedly felt unseen learns to become more careful about where they place their voice. And that's why many quiet people speak the most around those who genuinely listen. The fourth reason is energy awareness. Some conversations create energy, others drain it. Most people can feel the difference. Quiet people simply notice it faster. They quickly recognize gossip, pointless arguments, fake enthusiasm, constant negativity. And instead of participating, they step back. Not because they're antisocial, because they're protective of their mental energy. They understand something many people learn too late. Not every conversation deserves your attention. Not every opinion deserves your response. And not every room deserves the best version of you. That's why silence is often misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like withdrawal. But from the inside, it's often wisdom. It's the decision to save your energy for people, places, and conversations that truly matter. And this leads to something most people never realize about quiet people. Their silence is not a weakness. In many cases, it's a form of strength. The first sign of that strength is that they don't need everyone to like them. Many people spend their lives chasing approval. They change their opinions to fit in. They laugh at jokes they don't find funny. They agree with things they don't believe, all because they're afraid of being rejected. But quiet people often see things differently, because they've already learned how to be alone. And once you're comfortable being alone, you become much harder to control. You stop saying things just to impress people. You stop performing for attention, and you become more interested in authenticity than popularity. The second sign of strength is that silence doesn't make them uncomfortable. Most people are constantly surrounded by noise, notifications, conversations, entertainment, distractions. The moment silence appears, they rush to fill it. But quiet people have developed a rare ability. They can sit with their own thoughts. They can reflect without needing constant stimulation. And while others are escaping themselves, they're learning from themselves. That's why many of the world's greatest ideas are born in moments of solitude, because clarity often arrives when the noise finally disappears. And the third sign of strength may be the most powerful of all. When quiet people speak, people listen. Not because they speak louder, but because they speak less. Their words carry weight. They observe before reacting, think before responding, and choose their words carefully. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, they focus on saying something worth hearing. That's why their voice often has more impact than the voices speaking all day long. So if you've ever been called too quiet, remember this. Silence is not always insecurity. Silence is not always fear. Sometimes silence is awareness. Sometimes silence is discipline. And sometimes silence is wisdom. The strongest people are not always the loudest people in the room. Sometimes they're the ones quietly observing from the corner, understanding everything while saying very little. Because true confidence doesn't need constant attention. It simply knows its value. And that's the hidden truth about quiet people. They aren't waiting to become someone else. They're simply waiting for a reason to speak.